Let's start looking at some of the reports here. So if I run the app, just so we get some context of where we're looking under run reports here, the reports I'm going to run are basically viewing visits, right? Visits over the last week, visits over 1 hour, visits on a day. Maybe these aren't the right reports to run, but I think visits over last week is a pretty realistic one that we'd want to do. If I click on one, um, obviously it's not doing anything right now. It's just got the header and it's displaying a blank page. So if I go back to the main menu and then I exit out the application, then we're here. The first thing I want to point out is I want to go back to our view visits, right? Which is kind of view all visits, right? Like viewing all transactions in the capstone. If you look at it, there's what you start to do is you see a pattern that emerges a lot of times in programming. There's often, get your data, right, in some way, whether it be reading, fetching from an API, loading from a database, right, whatever word you want to use, whatever medium you're going to get your data from. You get your data and then you display your data. And if you separate those two things, what you'll find is your getting of the data can be reusable, right? And your displaying of the data can be reusable. And so with these reports, they're all ultimately reading views in, or I'm sorry, reading visits in, and then they're ultimately displaying those visits. Now, in between reading visits and displaying visits, what's going to happen with a report is we're going to filter the visits in some way. In other words, we're going to go through the visits and say, these are the only visits I want to show, like the ones in the last week, or the ones in the last month, or the ones in this date range, etc. The ones with the cost over this much that are longer visits. So with that in mind, to start this, what I'd like to do is kind of refactor our current view visits into the two patterns I'm talking about, which is reading the data or getting the data and displaying it. So I'm going to go to view visits, and then we'll be able to reuse those functions over and over again in other parts of the app. Now, in order to make this reusable, right now we loop through the data and we do something with it right away. We print it, okay? But what we could do instead is establish an array list. So I'm going to say array list of a certain type, which is going to be a visit, and I'll call this visits equals new array list. And I didn't remember before, but we don't have to say visit here. We can if we want to, but you don't have to. It's just going to say that it's unnecessary. Yeah, it's literally like replace it with just this. It's not necessary. So this array list, remember, you can just add things to. So instead of, as we fill up our visits here, instead of immediately printing them, we can do the getting or the reading part and just kind of load them, store them, right, into memory. How are we going to store them? We're going to store them in this array list, okay? So I'll say visits dot add, and I'll add a visit to it. So I'm keeping like a nice collection of all the visits there. So then if I take this much code, which is I'm going to get rid of this comment because we'll do the display separately. But this code right here, if we just look at it in isolation, not with the menuing, prompting to return, not with the printing out the header of the page, this code really reads the visits, right? Reads the visits from the visits.csv file. So I've showed you that you can highlight something and right click and say refactor extract method, which is what we want to do here. And I'm going to call this method, I'll call it read visits from file, okay? And I'll hit enter. What I'm not doing here is the visits, I read them into this array here, but I'm not really doing anything with them, right? So at the end, what I want to do is return the visits from this method. Now it's going to complain to me, you're returning void here, right? But I know that I really want this to be an array list of type visit. Later we'll learn about interfaces and learn how to make this kind of more generic, but I think this is based on what we've kind of taught so far. We'll do this just as an array list of visits, and then we'll do read visits from file, and read visits from file is now returning an array list, so we can read into an array list of visit objects, and we'll call that visits here, right? Now I could call it something else here, right? Whatever I return, I don't need to name it the same as what I did in here, but I like that name. It kind of reflects what's going on there. There's a list of visits in there. Then if I take the visits, right, after I've read the visits from the file, and yeah, if we want to see this, it's not going to really show anything, but what if I just do an sout visits here, and I'll set a breakpoint here and just run this kind of in debug mode so we can see what's happening. So I'll do view visits. It's going to read the visits from the file. It pauses here. If we look at visits right now, do you see how it's got 103 items, and they're all visit objects. Each one of these is a visit object with the data set in the appropriate properties, right? This is our, remember our toString method puts it in the format of the CSV file, so that's why it's represented this way, right, in the debugger. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of visits there, and we've kind of separated the reading of them from the writing of them. So if I wanted to actually write out the visits, I could loop through the visits. I could say for visit : visits. So this is where I see people, like, once we learn for loops, it's hard for some people to let go of, you know, creating the I variable and so forth. But this is literally going to hand you from the visits array, one visit each time through as you go through. And it looks like I have my syntax off a little. Do I need remove expression? So I must be remembering this incorrectly. So I'm going to go look it up in the workbook, because that's what I want you to do, right? If you don't get it right. So the first time. So I'll go into the workbook here. I know it was our third workbook where we learned about loops and so forth, I believe. Well, this is an array list. Iterating through. I think I might want to go to the other workbook where we first learned about the for loops. So I'm going to jump in there. So I'll go back to workbook 2, strings, loops, and arrays, and go down to the array section. And here's a for each loop example. Oh, see, I forgot the data type at the front of this, right? It's like, this doesn't need a data type, does it? But I need to say what is the data type of this thing as we come in. So basically I'm saying each one of these, it's going to hand me a visit, right? One of these visit objects inside the array list for each of these. And now it's just complaining that I'm not doing anything with visit. So now I can just sout, like I did before, visit dot display, right? Display was what we worked on in one of the other videos, to be able to display the content of a visit to the screen in a reasonable way. So I go ahead and run that, and I've got, so I'll do view visits, and we're back in business here. Okay. It's basically, I refactored the code. I changed the code around, but it's having the same output. It's having the same effect. But now I'll be super ready to make it easy to write all my reports. In fact, to make it even easier, I'm going to grab this here and extract this method. And I'm going to call this display visits, right? Because that's all it's really doing is taking in a visits array and displaying it. And so now do you see how we have kind of the individual parts? We have the reading, loading, fetching, whatever word you want to use of the data into an array of objects. And then we have the display list of objects. Array. The data is an array of objects. So what we're going to do when we start writing reports is we're going to introduce one step in between here, which is going to be to filter the list, basically. To take the list and instead of showing all of the visits, we're going to show just some of the visits. Okay, so I think it would be good to call this part 1 and attack that in the next video, just because of video size, length, weariness. So I'll start that video in a second.